Hello everyone, I'm Chief Meteorologist Ed Bloodsworth with WKRG News 5. Let's take a look at the tropics. We are continuing to keep our eyes on Invest 97, which was designated today. It is an open tropical wave, which is producing some thunderstorm activity over the island of Hispaniola, so over Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and now over the southern Bahamas and Turks and Caicos. This is expected to continue on a west to northwesterly track. It'll continue to interact with numerous land masses, including the long island of Cuba. So it'll certainly drop some heavy rain for the Cuban folks over the next 24 to 36 hours. The big question marks: what happens after it bypasses Cuba? This now has a high likelihood of development over the Florida Straits or the eastern Gulf of Mexico in the red shaded area. There's a 70% chance that that will happen, so it's appearing more likely than not that either a depression or a tropical storm will develop in this region, and there's a 40% chance over the next 2 days. I think while it's interacting with land, there is no shot of development, but once this starts to pull away, so maybe late Saturday, that's when we could start to see this thing begin its organization phase. So what's driving and steering this thing around? Well, we have a very interesting setup. So we have high pressure in the Atlantic and a big strong high centered over the lower 48. But pay attention to this little shortwave trough, which is digging in over the Great Lakes Stakes and into the Ohio Valley. That is going to work to create this little avenue, create this little gap between the two highs, and that will allow this system to pull north and actually start to yank this thing into the eastern Gulf of Mexico. But what's interesting is what happens after Sunday. As that trough quickly ejects, high pressure will start to build back in around the system, and that's going to mean that the steering currents with the system weaken dramatically. So we expect that this will start to slow down somewhere over the southeast U.S., and if it slows down enough, this could certainly present a significant flood threat wherever this actually moves. Now, again, the actual forecast track I still think is very much uncertain. We got our first run of forecast models, otherwise known as the spaghetti plot today, and we still show this interacting with Cuba. Then we start to see that turn to the north happening somewhere over the Florida Straits or on the northern coast of Cuba. Now, the exact time or the exact location when this turn begins is in question. It all depends on where the actual center of this thing finally consolidates. Most of our modeling suggests that the consolidation will happen somewhere maybe off of Key West or just north of the western half of Cuba. If that happens and the system starts to get its act together early, that would mean a more easterly track, which is the general consensus of forecast modeling, and this would mean some significant impacts to the west coast of Florida, the Big Bend of Florida, perhaps into the central Florida panhandle. But if the system forms a little farther to the west, which is still a possibility, that would mean this entire area of all these models would shift west as well. So we cannot entirely rule out at this time impacts to maybe the Alabama Gulf Coast or the Northwest Florida Gulf Coast. We're not entirely out of that chance as of this point. It's all going to depend again on when this forms and where this forms. So based off our current thinking at this time, we believe that scenario number one, a more eastern track, seems to be the most reasonable at this time. And that again means impacts from rain, surge, tornado threat, and most of the wind impacts from the system would be felt on Florida's west coast, all the way up to the central Florida panhandle. So Apalachicola, the Big Bend, areas that actually got impacted by Idalia last year, if you remember that storm, perhaps as far west as Panama City. But if this storm starts to consolidate a little bit farther to the west, that would mean we would have impacts farther west as well. So the yellow shaded area would include the WKRG viewing area. And again, I think this scenario is looking a little less likely at this point, but not out of the realm of possibilities. So we need to keep our eyes on this as we move you through the weekend and into early next week. I would say it's a good time to review your severe weather plan. Again, 54 counties in Florida have been placed under a state of emergency, and there are sandbags available in Northwest Florida for preparations for this system next week. I think at the very least, with anything getting into the Gulf, we would see a high threat of rip currents and some increased surf activity as well on our beaches as we move into next week. If this stays far enough to the east, that would actually mean some drier air getting pulled in to our region. So, still some question marks with the system, but based off where things stand now, this is our current thinking. Again, that is subject to change, and we'll certainly bring you updates through the rest of the week and into the weekend. So here are your top 4 takeaways. No development over the next 36 hours as it moves over the Greater Antilles this weekend. The environment becomes a little healthier, especially by Sunday, and then it is now likely this will move into the eastern Gulf of Mexico. Northern Gulf Coast, at this point, exact impacts still somewhat in question, so you need to go ahead and just make sure you're staying with WKRG News 5, as we'll keep you updated on any changes regarding Invest 97, but it is looking likely now that we'll have perhaps another named storm developing in the Gulf of Mexico. The next name on the list is Debbie, followed by Ernesto and Francine. So make sure you stay with WKRG. We'll keep you updated. You can find the latest on WKRG.com. You can also download the free WKRG weather app. And to follow along with the systems, make sure you check out our hurricane map room on our website.